Then we got to talk about stuff. And then I got to edit the stuff.
No, none of this has to be done.
We can just watch fucking
Watch Hard Knocks.
clips from 2004 to 2009 movies.
Yeah.
Back when they made comedy. Back when everyone was so scared. Here we are, Abe, Cast Iron Brains, a podcast that has concluded here 1 week before the end of summer break and the glorious return of public schooling. That children are annoying. My name is Bob, sitting across the way from my good friend and co-host. That's Abe. How you doing tonight, Abe?
Doing well, Bob.
Yeah, here we are. Lori's here too. How you doing tonight, Lori? Tonight is Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. Lori is still getting over a big talk we had this morning about...
Wasn't a big talk.
About the subscriptions that we subscribe to, the Disney Pluses and the Netflixes and the HBOs, and that Disney Plus wants to raise... Well, we'll get into all of that a little bit later on.
We don't
maybe.
have to talk about it. We could just not.
Abe, it's Wednesday.
I spent all day trying to wipe it off of myself so that I came home nice. So let's maybe not talk about it.
Well, you always start these podcasts so nice and progress to only more niceness.
No, I mean when I walked in the door. I walked not like home.
Right. Certainly not this. Abe, I understand it's Wednesday because you were stranded.
Well, that's not why it's Wednesday, but...
My story, that is why it's Wednesday in the context of the show.
Give me too
certainly.
much credit.
We are recording on a Wednesday night because, as I understand it, you were stranded inside a whale's vagina on Monday. Is that correct?
Discovered by the Germans in 1904, they named it San Diego, which, of course, in German means a whale's vagina.
That is somewhat accurate. So last week I went to Kansas City for a work thing for the week, and
yes.
There was a planned, yet another person that I know is turning 40, and so there was a trip in San Diego, and so I was like, all right, well, I'll be done with the work on Friday morning. I couldn't make the thing work, so I flew back to Atlanta, laid over here, and then I flew to San Diego with the plan that I would come back Sunday night.
That is a dreadful plan.
Yes.
That is, how is that acceptable? Why
yes.
wasn't there some way to get you from Missouri
from
to
Kansas
California
City to San Diego? You would think, I'm halfway across the country, just finish it up, and then, circle back to Atlanta when I'm done. There was no direct flight. I don't know, maybe there's not a lot of
because you were at a
business
regional airport.
Between Kansas City and San Diego. One of the connecting flights was Atlanta. Like, you can go through Atlanta. It's like, all right, I guess I'll just do that.
Yeah, does it count as connecting if
Yes.
it's
and it was
the other direction?
It was long enough of a layover that I actually just came back to my apartment.
You went home during that layover?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Ate a sandwich and then I went back.
There wasn't, you couldn't have flown into
Missouri's
Chicago
a regional
or something?
airport.
So there were many options through Chicago or
makes
through some other place. I was like, why am I doing that? Why not go home?
Why not go home?
Because that sucks.
Right. It sucks, but it was going to suck any which way. There was the added benefit. So
that's true.
The reason why it took an extra day for me to get home is that the planners of this 40th in San Diego opted with the cut rate airline Frontier, and they have very, very cheap prices. And usually there's a reason why they're so cheap. We found out this weekend. So Frontier on Sunday, we get to the airport 2 hours before, just like they tell you to do. And like an hour and a half before the flight, they're like, oh, yeah, that plane is not here. I don't know, maybe tomorrow. And so, like, we had to get a hotel. Everybody else was...
maybe tomorrow.
Like,
absolutely
by the way,
not.
Frontier, and I can't even fault them. Other people were mad, and they were like, trying to be upset. There's only, like, one representative from Frontier, that poor woman who was getting all the harassment, but there's nothing she can do. She probably has the same information we do. She's looking at the board like, oh, the plane's not coming.
Right.
There is no service. I mean, there is no live person you can talk to. There's no email. There's no chat. There's no nothing. It's just you get text alerts that tell you it's not here. We'll tell you tomorrow.
Why are you flying Frontier? And you are a person. You're an upstanding, real live adult. You don't usually fly these budget airlines when all your boys are flying the budget airlines.
Right.
Why did you accept these circumstances this time?
So these trips I don't plan, right? And I'm just giving the dates, and these are the airlines that we're going with, and it was like significantly cheaper. I don't understand how Frontier functions as an airline, because a round trip ticket from
Abe, based on recent experiences, you might almost say they don't.
But yeah, they don't. I'm saying mathematically, it doesn't. The math doesn't add up. Like, so it is like it was $300 cheaper to fly on Frontier than it is on Delta. It was like $170 versus like $450 or something.
Right,
like that.
Which would have been great if, in fact, you had been able to fly on Frontier on the days that you chose for your itinerary.
Yes.
I've looked at these budget airlines a bunch because, of course, it is appealing, right? Like, because there was one that started operation out of Charlottesville here and was flying to Orlando.
But only on Mondays and Fridays. But
it was like $39 was the like $39 was the cheapest ticket. Now that only gets you and the clothes on your back onto the airplane. So like if you want
backpack, $20.
Right. Anything
Seatbelt,
literally
$30.
anything in your hand, it was going to be like, I think it was $40 or $50 for every bag, whether it's a checked piece of baggage or a carry-on or a personal item. And so that $40 ticket, if you have a purse or a backpack and a suitcase, then all of a sudden is another $100 on top of that. Right. So it's not exactly as cheap as it looks. But if you're the sort of person who is literally just trying to fly to Vegas or something and arrive with the clothes on your back and whatever money you've got in your wallet and then leave 2 days later and not work, I get the appeal. But every other time I've gone and priced these tickets out where it's like, okay, we're a family of 4, we're going to have between a total of 3 and 5 bags between carry-ons and actual luggage and all of that stuff. It never works out to being a deal to the point where it's like so obvious.
Especially because they're unreliable.
Yes.
Right. They're relatively unreliable. So it's like, okay, maybe for the family we could save $175 or something all together on a $1,000 trip or something.
Right.
But that in the face of if you miss that flight or if there are problems with that flight, there might not be another one for like 2.5 days.
Yes.
Like, whereas with Delta or American or United or whatever, it's like, okay, we'll get you on the next one because there's always a next one. But with these other airlines, it's like, it's not really a next one until next week.
Right. So. Well, I mean, I guess in these, I think like Breeze or all these other airlines that don't fly daily, like I think Frontier was daily and that's why it was just the next day.
Yeah, they have a lot.
But like they speaking of like the upcharge, everything's built around, you want like a soda, that's like $8. If you want this, it's like everything costs something, right? And they have the you can have like a book bag you can put your stuff in. That's part of it, or like a purse or what have you. But now they apparently have this new policy where they're like size up your backpack because some people are trying to stuff it, and they put you through this like humiliating ritual of like, hey, you out of the line. There's this like little contraption that they have that you got to stick your bag in and it has to fit, or else you'll be charged $100 or something, like making the whole thing not worth it. And one of my friends had to go through that. They passed the test, but they were a little worried, like,
And then he's like taking out pairs of socks and like handing them off to you. Like, look, you got to wear 3 pairs of socks today. Sorry, Abe. That's part of the deal. Me turning 40 means you got to wear 3 pairs of socks and you got to put these boxers in your pocket. That's just the fucking rules because I'm 40. Sorry.
Actually, funny you mentioned that. They had to leave a pair of shoes. A pair of shoes didn't make the cut. Basically, the shoes were cheaper than the $100 that they were going to charge them. So they said, fuck the shoes, and they left them in Atlanta. So there is no
real airlines, you maniacs.
So there is no I would not recommend using these airlines for just about most scenarios. The one exception would be like if you're just traveling solo. I mean, I'm with this group, but fuck them, right? It's not like I have like any kids to worry about or like a spouse or anything like that. It's just me. I have like 2 days baked in as vacation, so I'd have to be working on Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah, it's the time flexibility.
Right. And so like if you have to go somewhere, don't fly these. Actually, just avoid flying these airlines in most cases. But their way of apologizing for like, oh, our bad, is that they'll give you $75 that you can only use on future like basically like, hey, we suck, but like
That's standard.
could you use our airline in the future? And so we'll see. But yeah, that's where I was.
That's the thing that makes me most mad about flying and like when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like all I can think is, what if I made a client, like they had an appointment at noon and they got there at like 11:45 and they've had this appointment for months and they sat there until 7 o'clock. And I was just like, oh, sorry, I can do it
Yes.
now.
Or,
It would be so beyond okay.
or then you do it now, and then you're like, all right, and also here's a $40 voucher for you to use again in 3 months, if you'd like.
Next time I'll throw in some free conditioner. Just like there's no recourse. You just have to sit there and take it.
They can I guess they have to like cite a reason for why it took them an extra day, and they couldn't use weather because there's no weather issue. They couldn't use anything other than crew rest, like which you would think ahead of time, like, oh, we already have this slotted for them to fly and work around the crew rest around that. But no, they're like, oh yeah, they forgot to sleep, and so we can't.
Right.
Very bizarre.
Unrelated, but when I was flying back from Denver, and it was a tiny little plane from Philadelphia to Charlottesville for the last leg of that flight. Like, I don't remember the name of the plane, but it was one row of seats on the left side and 2 seats on the. So it was 1 on the left, 2 on the right, and maybe 20 rows deep. Like this is a very small plane. It's as small as they get as far as like regional jets go. And there was that ritual of, and this wasn't about it being a budget airline. This was just that there's nowhere to put bags. And so they do have to check everybody's bag to make sure it fits into this slot. If it doesn't fit into this slot, then they have to put it under the plane or what have you, right? Which is fine. So everybody has to go through that. There was this very fancy man. He was an older guy in his 60s. If I had to guess, I would say lawyer or doctor. He was an Indian fella, so I lean more towards doctor probably, being a racist. But very fancy guy. Like just by looking at him, you're like, very well put together. This is a fancy man.
A dapper fella.
Dapper fella, well dressed, well put together. And as he goes to speak to the gate agent, very well spoken. And he's like, I wanted to see about getting an upgrade on this flight to first class. And she looks at him, and she looks over her shoulder at the plane that's sitting there on the tarmac. And she says something like, this is a black lady in Philadelphia, we ain't got no first class on this one, sweetie. And then as he's walking away, she goes, oh, and I need you to put your bag in this thing to make sure it fits. And he just had the most like offended, like the way that only a dapper, well put together man of a certain age and of a certain class and wealth can be offended, like that, just that very particular type of offense.
There's a meme.
Like,
it's
yes,
the white guy.
You have to put your bag in the same stupid fucking metal slot that we all have to put our bag in.
Did he perceive that as retaliatory, like because he asked the question that he was being punished?
I think that he saw it as a slight, and yes, in part because he had somehow stepped out of line.
Let that be a lesson to you.
That's right. Anyway, let's talk about Oppenheimer here at the top, so that we don't get yelled at the end. I did not take the opportunity to go see this 3-hour movie again.
Didn't really have one.
I didn't really have an opportunity. I kept an eye on the Alamo tickets for it, just in case. And over the course of last week, now granted the theater has gotten smaller as time has gone on, so it's not in the big theater because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is there.
It's dibs.
Right, the Meg 2 comes out, and it wants the big screens as well, and then Barbie is still doing well, so it's in a reasonably large theater. So Oppenheimer slowly made its way from, like, the big screen to the medium screen to now the smallest screen at our local movie theater, but still nearly or entirely sold out basically every showing besides, like, the 10 o'clock in the morning ones. They were consistently selling out. So this movie is still doing very well, at least here in this town.
Sound of Freedom numbers, I see. Still packing them in.
I guess so, yeah. Did you go see it a second time yet, or no?
No. I was watching the Meg 2 in Kansas City.
It's very important. All right. So what do we think about Oppenheimer as a piece of art? Abe, what did you think of the movie?
So, I did enjoy the movie. I saw this like in the middle of the night a few weeks ago. One of the impressions I was left with is there were certain scenes. I mean, the movie's, I'm not saying this is an Aaron Sorkin movie. This is a very, different type of movie. But like, maybe because it was like the depositions and the court scenes, it just kind of sometimes felt kind of Aaron Sorkin-y. And this goober Oppenheimer complaining about he's building this fucking bomb and he's got misgivings, like I'm supposed to feel bad for this guy. And I think that Truman guy was spot on. Like, fuck this guy. Like, what do you mean? You have no conception of it to what you're doing? Like, oh, I feel bad. Very obnoxious at the end, but I don't care. I don't know why that rubbed me the wrong way. But people
the expression of moral ambiguity about possibly the most morally consequential technological device built in the history of mankind rubbed you the wrong way.
It is baked into everything you're doing. What do you mean? What do you think was going to happen? Like, what are we talking about? Like, you were pursuing this course that was going to lead to the deaths of many, and then when it happened, you're like, oh, fuck. Now that's what people are going to think of me.
So, what do you think about the case for somebody like so what you're saying is that Oppenheimer, by virtue of the fact that he and his compatriots chose to work on this project, they should not be permitted to, or at least their moral compunction is ill-fitting in some way. They have no right to it because they have chosen to do this. What about the fact that we knew that certainly the Soviets were on their way to a bomb, and the Germans, at least, let's say halfway through the war, we believed that the Germans would be capable of producing such a weapon in relatively short order as well, and therefore you're sort of compelled, if you believe that the least bad actor available should get it first.
Right. So I understand why he would be moping after the fact or whatever. I just don't like seeing it. So I'm not even holding it. I just, because this happens a lot where people like do knowingly like things that are going to be, there's going to be a certain consequence as a result of your actions. And then they're like, oh, I didn't mean to do, it's like, yeah, you did. Like, it's whatever. Like, stop moping around.
You're saying, like, why make a movie about that?
I was trying to figure out, like, how.
It's kind of what you're saying. I'm fine with it existing. I just don't want to see it. It sounds like you're speaking my language of, this isn't interesting. Why are you making this movie?
To that point, like I said, I'm glad that they made the movie because it was entertaining as a whole. But, like, before the trailers came out, I was trying to figure out, like, how were they going to tell this story, right? I mean, they're not going to show the bomb. They're going to probably talk about this Oppenheimer thriller, right? So, like, what's going to be the story that holds this thing together? And it was basically this, like, betrayal, the fucking dopes.
No, shitty women.
And the women being involved. But, like, it was just like...
What's going to hold together this Christopher Nolan movie? A non-linear narrative structure and crazy bitches. That's what's going to hold together the Christopher Nolan movie. It's pretty consistent.
Somebody was talking about, like, was liking it to the Social Network. Basically, it's like you have to tell the story and then you have to find a way to do it. And so they're going through, we're going to go back and forth. They're suspected of being a commie sympathizer after the fact. Very ungrateful, by the way. Like, you're okay before when I'm building your stupid bomb, and now it's not okay anymore. But, like, you kind of have to tell a story a certain way, and they kind of had to do it in this weird, like, let's do the these depositions. He's interacting with these commie people. Maybe he's sharing information with them. They kind of had to find a way to tell the story. I kind of had a similar issue with Barbie, where like the story had to be told a certain way to get to all the beats, and the story itself is whatever, but like the beats were good. It's kind of like that with this one, where it's like this. I'm glad the story was told, but just like as a clunky way to tell it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The other option is to just do it as like a straight history piece.
But that's felt like what it was. Was it not that?
No, I don't think this was. Without having read the source material or any of the competing source material.
What was the timeline jump? 3 years?
Well, we get him as a student, which would have been in the 19 teens, I believe.
Sure,
and then
gets linear. We get the backstory, but like our timelines are.
We have the Manhattan
apart.
Project, which is happening in the middle end of the Second World War, and then we have the deposition, which I think is just a few years, 8 years later, maybe at most, something like that.
It's not like whoa
and
timeline.
Then,
it's like
right, and then we have
straight history movie.
The Robert Downey Jr. Before the Senate committee thing, which is then another decade or so after that, I believe. So.
It just didn't feel... It felt very much like a regular history movie to me.
Yeah, I think like every other Christopher Nolan movie of consequence, it's a story about subjectivity versus objectivity and what it means to tell a story and who gets to tell the story and what the telling of that story means to the person who's telling it and to the people who are receiving it. This is a guy who, like his brother, Jonathan Nolan, in the Westworld thing, they are fixated on the means and method of narrative storytelling and dissecting it each step along the way. There's an argument to be made that is what every single Christopher Nolan movie is about. It is about the telling of a story and shitty women, yes. But specifically... The Prestige is about that. Memento is explicitly about that. Inception is 100% about that. All of these movies are about how it is that we tell our stories and the lens through which we can understand. How can we possibly understand anything objectively given our personal subjective lenses? And that seems to be his fixation. I thought this was a wonderful movie, just sort of as a movie. And it was interesting and challenging and difficult and good in a way that a lot of other movies that are billed for adults aren't necessarily, right? Like, I think this is a fairly mature movie, and it's weird to me that it's made $500 million, right? Like, 'cause my suspicion going in was like, how is he going to pull this off? Like, I know Nolan movies make a ton of money, except for Tenet, which is super fucking weird. Plus the pandemic thing was going on.
It was the pandemic that hurt it.
Right,
it wasn't in theaters.
I'm not sure that Tenet, even in the best case scenario, would have had the legs that something like this did, or some of the other.
It totally would have.
I don't know. Tenet's fucking super weird.
Yeah, but you see it anyway.
Yeah, sure. But I'm impressed that there's an audience for this sort of thing, and
the audience of boomers.
Yeah, I guess. It felt like when we saw it at the shitty Regal, the fake IMAX Regal that we went to see this movie, it was actually a fairly young crowd, and it didn't feel like it was.
I didn't feel that way. I felt very much like we were. I felt young there, which I don't feel most of the time.
If the success of Oppenheimer at the box office was just like the first weekend, then you can maybe say it was right in the coattails of the Barbenheimer goofy thing. But like, it's still doing well separate from that. It's not like people are watching those two things together anymore, right? So
right.
And yeah, I think it's a Nolan thing. He's just like a known brand, and like the summer was kind of like very weak when it comes to movies. There were a lot of just movies that just did not perform well, and so maybe people were like, "Oh, Nolan, known quantity, let's go watch that." Like among all the
yeah, I think part of my appreciation for this movie is how much so many of these other movies that I've seen just fucking suck. or the fact that I just have, like, even when I have an interest in seeing one of the movies, I see it and it's just, it was fine, but like, who fucking cares ultimately? Yeah. And this one is like, yeah, I can see myself revisiting this many times.
Yeah, but I felt that about this movie. It was fine, but so?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's fair. That's fine.
This is not my kind of movie. It's a history movie. I would rather have watched a documentary about all of that.
Well, and to take sort of the Nolan tack here, I think that watching a documentary about it would be equally as problematic from a how much of the real history are we going to get from this thing that we're engaging with. And I'm
sure, but they're
because even a documentary has a point of view, and this has a point of view, and it's trying to say something. And I don't think
I'm not saying I need an unbiased
I just disagree that the smart thing to take away from this movie is a better understanding of the actual history of the man J. Robert Oppenheimer, and rather to engage with it as a piece of art and wonder about what it might be saying otherwise, besides about this one particular dude.
What did you make of the, like, you know, on one hand, like, there are all these men, they're trying to do these big things, but they're also like these very petty men too, where they get like just perceived slights, that they harbor these resentments, and they try to undermine each other career-wise because of misunderstandings.
Right. We've talked about, or I have talked about anyway, Amadeus being one of my favorite movies of all time before, and I can't remember whether or not you've seen it.
Which one is that?
It's the one about Mozart, and F. Murray Abraham plays Salieri, like the jealous, not quite as good composer.
I think it's one of those movies that I said that I would watch, but I don't think I have.
Right. You, again, as I'm sure I've said on this very show many times before, you need to go watch Amadeus.
I'm going to write it down the same place I wrote it down last time. Oh.
This is, in a funny sort of way, this is a remake of Amadeus, because the character portrayed by Robert Downey Jr., who no doubt will get an Oscar nod for his performance here, whose name escapes me at the moment, Louis somebody.
Strauss?
Yes, Strauss.
No, Strauss.
I think there was a conversation about
the very beginning of the movie.
The pronunciation of the name.
He says it's Strauss,
he's trying to make
and Oppenheimer continues to pronounce it Strauss.
Was that like he's trying to make it sound less
It's a
Jewish
thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that Oppenheimer called him out for wanting to sound less Jewish.
No,
I thought that was the point of that entire exchange. Yes,
I mean, I don't know,
100%. That's what that was.
But Strauss is how it would be.
By refusing to say it his way, you mean like him just constantly saying it the other way was the pushback?
I thought it was Strauss, that he was trying to sound less. He wanted to sound more anglicized rather than Germanic, and therefore also slightly less Jewy, and so he called himself Strauss. Like that was the whole point of that character. Yeah. But whatever. Maybe I completely have it backwards. He's basically the Salieri character. Like he is. Like never, like, and it's similar to what you're saying here about like in the presence of, I mean, let's avoid maybe some of the great man of history sort of stuff, but in the presence of like absolute brilliance, like we've got Einstein here looking at ducks on a pond, and this asshole is walking up to him worried about what he might have been saying about him in the moments before. Like, dude, there are more important things at stake than your petty personal politics, and this is a lesson that the Robert Downey Jr. character never fucking learns, right? Like it's all that ever fucking matters to him, and that reminded me a great deal of the dynamic between Mozart and Salieri in Amadeus. Also, I thought that there is a moment that brings that dynamic home in a way that was too much. And this happens in Christopher Nolan movies fairly consistently, not all the time, but I always feel like he insists on putting, and maybe it's not him, maybe it's a learned behavior based on having gotten note after note after note from studio idiots who are like, no, you have to explain this, or you have to do a quick 3-second flashback to the thing that you're explaining now so that the audience doesn't forget, so that like, we got to keep them engaged and we don't want to lose them. So when they get to the very end and they have to have the Han Solo guy, it's like Aiden Ehrenlich or something, and it took me forever to place him, but he plays Robert Downey Jr.'s aide in the movie, the guy who's like Sherpaing him around for the Senate hearing.
Right.
I was like, man, that guy is good, and I like him, and he looks familiar, but I don't know why. And then I finally figured out he played Han Solo in the Solo movie on from the Disney people. So whatever. At the end of the movie, when it is finally revealed that the conversation that Oppenheimer and Einstein were having at the duck pond was about how Oppenheimer is concerned that, yeah, we did the bomb and we were worried that we were going to vaporize every atom on Earth and destroy the entire world. But it didn't happen, and that's good. But I'm worried that functionally that is what we did anyway, that we destroyed the world, even though the bomb itself didn't destroy the world in that moment, that functionally we unleashed a power and a terror so vast and great that the world will ultimately be destroyed by it. And that was why Einstein was stricken in that moment as he walks by. It had nothing to do whatsoever with Robert Downey Jr., right. And Robert Downey Jr. has been obsessed with this moment, along with one other public semi-humiliation, and fixated on Oppenheimer because of it, because he believes that he was slighted in that moment, like a stupid personal slight in some way, harmed him, and he's been upset about it for 20 years or what have you. And it wasn't about him, right? And we get the reveal that it wasn't about him, right. But then we have to cut back to 1963 or whatever the timeline is, the very end of the timeline in this movie.
LBJ giving him the thing?
Right, the Han Solo guy has to turn around and be like, "You're so vain. You probably thought that song was about you, bro, but it wasn't about you at all. Because they probably didn't even think about you because you're just a tiny little man. You don't matter at all. Like, we don't need that line. Like, the whole point was well explained. We don't need the rubber mallet over our head to drive the point home one more time, and that sort of thing drives me crazy. And it's come up in his movies before. I can't remember off the top of the head. But in Batman, there's always, in at least two of the three Batman movies, there's always, and part of it is just the nature of supervillain movies.
Yeah, it works
where it's like,
in a superhero movie. I have to now give my big villain speech, and it's all about like turning the hero's words back on him or something like that, right? But like at the end of Dark Knight, the only part of it that bothers me is the voiceover at the end when Christian Bale as Batman has to say, like, I have to become, he repeats the line about dying as a hero or living to find yourself become a villain. And it's like, I don't need that line repeated in that way. I know it's nice to tie up loose ends in screenplays, and you want to get the drive the point home, but in an important way, if you're not just doing it and you have to tell me about it, then you didn't actually do it. And he's a good enough filmmaker where I know that he is doing it, and I'm getting the message. Right. And it bothers me that they're worried about the idiots in the audience who might not be getting the message, that they have to drive it home again.
You know, I do wonder if it is indeed like a studio note, because like one of the problems with Tenet, that's, the pandemic being one reason why it didn't do as well at the box office, but another reason is like it was a little more confusing than the other movies that he did, and that had like less hand-holding scenes like this where like they drive the point home. And I do wonder if they're telling them, like, if somebody's paying attention like 95% of the time or greater, you don't need that sort of scene. But let's gear our movie towards 85% and up, and not 95. Basically, like one or two scenes.
I think Tenet had too much explaining in a weird way. I think Tenet would have been much better off with none of the hand-holding scenes, and you're just like, wait, what the fuck is happening? Like, okay, like let's not bring logic to this party at all, because like there's no, if you try to introduce 40% logic.
She literally says, don't try to understand it.
Is that Tenet or is that the dream one?
Tenet.
Is that Inception? Okay. Yeah, right. It's best not to try to understand it. I still think they could have done with a little bit less hand-holding there.
The issue with Tenet is that there was a lot of those scenes, but like it almost seemed like it was not reliable. Like it didn't clarify, or like with this example, Oppenheimer, like this question was clearly like open, and maybe the guy was saying something about the Strauss guy, or maybe he wasn't. So they resolved that open question. Like with Tenet, there wasn't like...
Right, but I thought all along it was super obvious that this guy was just a petty, stupid fucking politician who is your classic political striver, and he's looking at two of the smartest people in the history of the species, that in the recorded history of the species anyway, in J. Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein, and saying, you know what, I think they were talking about me. Like, no, you asshole.
Right.
They were never, and that wasn't ambiguous to me as a viewer of the film from the beginning. And yeah, sure, do you have the moment where you finally do the reveal and you show what the conversation was about? Fine. But like to then take it to that next level where you're fully banging the hammer on the audience's head, it always feels like a bit much to me.
They say diagnosing people is not responsible to do it in this way, but like that reads like narcissist, right? Where you just can't conceptualize that two people are talking about something that has nothing to do with you. It's like, oh, look at them.
That's literal textbook narcissism.
Right.
It must be about me.
There's a thing called covert narcissism, because like we think of narcissists as being like self-assured and like Trumpy.
Yeah.
But there is another kind of narcissist who is always down on themselves outwardly, and it's like, because you can't imagine that this isn't about you.
Yeah.
Like nobody gives a shit about you.
Right.
I have the opposite. I'm always shocked to find out that somebody else was thinking about me in any way. Like I don't know. I'm not saying
No
that
one
as a
is.
means of saying like I'm definitely not a narcissist.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm like that too, but I think that's the most people
That's
are like
just
that.
normal.
Right?
Yeah, most people are totally oblivious of
Right.
everything.
Yeah. But yeah, besides that sort of ham-fisted moment at the end of the movie, I thought it was very well done. I, again, still think that there's a weird thing going on with him and dark-haired women. I want to know...
Dark-haired is how you would describe his women.
Is that wrong?
It's scratching the surface of his women. Suicidal, miserable, life-ruining, dark-haired women. Yeah.
So was she like killed, or was she just drown her? Because I think it's kind of hard to drown yourself in that way, right?
It's hard, but when you're that miserable.
Take a bunch of fucking barbiturates and slice your wrists open, you die in a bathtub, right?
But wasn't she like not only doing that, like she was
She
like
drowned herself,
drowning
is what
herself
they
in
showed.
a weird angle, and there was like some hand that maybe somebody else was drowning her. I don't know. Does seem kind of, there are easier ways to kill yourself. Not that I'm encouraging it. But.
Yeah, but she's a woman, so
Yes.
she's stupid.
I don't think it's fair to say that these women are stupid. It's just that they are, perhaps in the Nolan conception, driven a little bit more by emotion and their personal psychology than the cold calculus of the intellect, as his male protagonists often are.
And at least in this example, like he was kind of bound by what happened, because there was this relationship. She actually does die, although it seems like maybe she didn't kill herself. Maybe something else happened. But like, so you couldn't write a happy story about her, right? She would have to be eventually miserable. And she wasn't married to him. So I don't know if there was another option that he had.
Right. Well, but and the fact that the wife is similarly
Wife was a disaster.
disastrous as well.
I have no
Jesus
defense
Christ.
for that.
I mean, the just being absolutely wasted and the baby screaming upstairs and
She stuck the landing though when the time came. She's like a good field goal kicker. She stuck it at the end.
Yeah. I'm going to briefly interrupt our conversation here to interject something that I meant to bring up last night, but in classic bad podcasting notes fashion, I failed to do so in the context of the conversation. So now Abe and Lori can't respond to it. They have my apologies. But watching one of the themes, the major themes of the movie is the compartmentalization versus working together, right? So Matt Damon's character, who we didn't talk about, the general, he is trying to keep everything sort of segmented and compartmentalized so that the left hand doesn't necessarily know what the right hand is doing. And Oppenheimer's job is to bring as many people together as possible to move towards one goal. And in order to accomplish this one massive and incredibly difficult goal that they're trying to accomplish, you need to get rid of all of the compartmentalization. You need to allow everyone to work together to get the job done. Similar to how after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was created in order to avoid the sort of compartmentalization that allowed 19 terrorists to come into this country and go to flight school and learn how to fly planes, but not necessarily land them, and then carry out a terror attack that resulted in the last 25 years of our history. And it was interesting to me to see this idea of coming together and working towards a goal, and then like realizing what humanity is capable of, and not necessarily in the best way. And it struck me as a sort of both a celebration of humanity's ability to come together and create something out of nothing just by virtue of our ability to cooperate and work together, but also the sort of horror of what we are capable of when we come together with a common goal. And I was reminded of like cliched like wall art where it says we're better together and that sort of thing, and the more we work together the better we'll do. I was reminded of like, say, Barney the big purple dinosaur, and like they would sing songs about cooperation and doing things together. And then if you were to create like a trailer or the moral message of the movie, you would have Barney sitting there singing his happy song, talking about working together, and then slowly the words get more drawn out, and the horror movie flashes start coming in, and Barney's fucking big purple dinosaur skin starts melting off of him, because in fact the more we work together, the better nuclear bombs will build, and the greater the horror will be.
Everything's more fun when we all work together. No, this is more terrific. The more we work together, the more we work together, the happier we'll be. Everything's more fun when we all work together. The more we work together, the happier we'll be. Everything's more fun when we all work together.
Anyway, that was my thought about one of the bigger themes of this movie that I failed to include in our fucking hour-long discussion of it, but I wanted to make sure I got it in here now because I don't think it'll come up again in the future. And then back to the rest of the show. What else did I want to say about this movie? There was some furor, a mild furor in the culture about the decision, Nolan's decision not to show the impact of the bomb on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and therefore also not to show mass Japanese death, not to show the results of this work. Do you think that is a failing of the film to not show the dead Japanese, and does it somehow detract from any of the moral messaging that might underlie the movie? And would it, like, for me anyway, before I finish this very leading question, it would feel cheap to me to show a bunch of vaporized Japanese folks or skin melting off a bunch of Japanese folks. And I don't know. It would feel grossly exploitative in a way that this movie didn't feel particularly exploitative. I sort of understand the instinct to be like, how can you talk about the creation of this bomb and the great man theory of history that sort of undergirds this sort of project and not show the actual devastation that he wrought? And I don't know that it could have been anything but grossly exploitative had they shown it. So.
Right. I do kind of land. I was kind of surprised that people made that point. Maybe they were kind of gearing up to make that point regardless. But like, it all depends on how you're telling the story. The way that Nolan went was like a point of view experience from the vantage point of Oppenheimer, right? So it would have, like you say, like it would be a gratuitous scene to show the bomb dropping on those two cities because that's not where Oppenheimer is, right? Because everything is through the lens of him and the people in his orbit, right? And like even when the word came out that the president decided to use it, it was done in the way that he would have experienced it, like newspapers or through word of mouth. It wasn't like we weren't in the TV era, or at least not like
right. He turned on the radio right. when everyone got word that something was happening and listened to the president announce it and bring the news of it to the world at the same time as everybody else listened to it for the first time.
Which would be in line with how in real life he would have come about knowing this, unless they give him a heads up. I don't know why they would do that. But like, to me, how would it work? Like, so all of this, they do the final test, everything gets the green light, and then they cut to some kids playing like soccer, and boom, like it wouldn't make sense right. to show it in that regard. Maybe at the end, like, oh, by the way, this fucking guy who has all these misgivings killed a fuck ton of people. Look at them all die, right? I mean, maybe at the very end, but you couldn't do that in the narrative.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I just don't know I don't think it would have added anything. If you can't be emotionally devastated by what you're seeing on the screen based on what Nolan put up there, I think that's a failure of yours. And it's like, to me, it's fucking weird to demand that you watch a bunch of Japanese people be vaporized. Right. Like, that's fucked up, weird, man.
But, maybe that's, people are into, hey, the man that built the bomb that went boom. Let me see it, right? Like, if you're one of those people.
Like, for empathy reasons, you need to see a bunch of vaporized Japanese or people with radiation sickness with their skin sloughing off them. Like that, I don't think that holds. And you should probably re-examine the premise of your criticism there, man.
That's why I think the criticism was basically locked and ready to go, regardless of the shape of the story, because you could make an argument for that depending on how the story was told, right? Like if it was like a bigger view kind of thing, but like that's not what happened. There was the rah-rah-rah speech that he gave where like, it would kind of go silent, and like I think they showed like some like his imagination of like there was a scene where a woman's or her like skin was coming apart because of the effects of the bomb. Like I think that was like maybe his attempt of like, I can at least present it this way because you can imagine like somebody imagining the worst in his head. Right.
And that's what they did. And, of course, the criticism there was that, oh, well, it happens to a white woman. It's like, well, that is not a response. That is not a – yes, that is who was in the room when Oppenheimer was experiencing the vision. That is a weird – like it.
And again, it tracks with, like, this – he's kind of reconciling with his role in this, his major role in this, and how this is not going to end with the America's use of the bomb. Like, it's going to begin this chain reaction – and soon it will be hitting people that he does know, people in the United States. So, like, it kind of works in that way. But it just seems like people, like those two arguments are easy. They're just kind of there for somebody to make it. But it didn't really track with the story that was being told here. I think he made the right choices there.
Yeah. And then there's the further criticism of this as cementing a history or a narrative about our history into people's minds that doesn't do justice to the arguments against dropping the bomb, and that people are upset at Nolan for failing to level cogent and rational arguments against the use of the bomb in a way that would have been more persuasive, and therefore it lets Oppenheimer off the hook because he's not being like the real arguments against dropping the bomb aren't given full shrift. That somehow and that somehow failing to present those arguments in their as the Steelman version of those arguments lets Oppenheimer, and by extension America, off the hook for its moral crimes here.
I guess I could.
And I think it's my response to that, in short, is it's very silly to demand that a movie do that for you. If that is your concern, you should consider looking elsewhere or making those arguments yourself. Certainly,
right.
But
and sometimes it's okay to just tell a specific story in the way that the person who's telling it says it, because okay, so in some respects that would be a valid criticism. Like this guy's just fucking whining because his name is gonna be associated with his bomb, but like this bomb impacted so many other people, and there should be some sort of recognition of that somehow in the story. Although I don't know how that would take shape. Like, I mean, what would there just be like this weird scene that somebody like says something critical? Like, I don't know. Like, it just wouldn't read like organic with the rest of the story. Like, it was a very specific story that they were trying to tell. Kind of like there was some criticism, like the Sound of Fury movie, where in a story it was like one of these like unlikely scenarios where kids are kidnapped in a very like ridiculous way, where like this woman comes and like schemes the parent out of the two kids, and they put them through this trafficking organization. Most cases it doesn't happen like that. It's like very like sometimes parents are unfortunately involved. It's a little more complicated, and people were criticizing the movie for just talking about these rare incidences and not talk about the bread and butter of like trafficking children. And it's like that's not what this story was trying to tell. Like, I mean, they had like a specific story. They told that story. Well,
right. You know what's not an interesting story? The 97% of so-called kidnapped or trafficked kids who were just picked up from school by the non-custodial parents and taken across state lines. Like that is not like, yeah, maybe there's an interesting family drama to tell there, but that's very mundane unless you get into the very specifics of that one particular family. That largely won't be interesting because they're just trashy people. Sorry, that's what most of these stories are about the kidnapped kids. Way more interesting story is the ones who get actually picked up by some weird child smuggling cartel and brought to Mexico or whatever, right? Like that's a way more interesting story. And that's because humans are attracted to the outlier stories, right? Like it's just more interesting.
That is true.
Way.
Yeah, because we are basically like prisoners of like very narrow types of stories. Like we're just like captivated by those, and like anything that doesn't fit that. That's why sometimes like a movie that will be based on real life, like that Captain Sully thing, there was no real movie there. Like fucking stupid Canadian birds. I'm not saying Canada had anything to do with it, but there were Canadian birds that came and they attacked both of the engines. And
You're talking about Canada geese?
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah, Canadian geese of some sort. And again, the engines both fail. Unlikely scenario, but it happens, I guess. The guy kind of sizes his looks at his options like, I can't make it to that airport. Oh, look at this, all this water. Perhaps I can do this landing. He does it. Everybody's happy. But in the movie, you have to have some tension and conflict. And so they made up stuff like where like the National Transportation Safety Board takes like an adversarial, like, oh, you could have done this thing better. Like creating drama where it doesn't exist, because we need to see that in a story. Like if it's just like, look at Tom Hanks, isn't he great for 90 minutes?
13.
Yeah.
Apollo 13 with the marriage strife.
Yes, you have to be.
Like her ring falls down the drain. Like it's not exciting enough that there's people trapped in a spaceship. We need marital strife too.
Yeah,
if you tell me, if next you're going to tell me that the square peg into a round hole thing for the air filter was they made that up for the movie, and my entire life will be shattered. I've been living.
No, that's real.
That better be fucking real. The square peg round hole issue.
But yeah, so like you have to tell the story a certain way, or else people won't.
And like the conflict of like the guy Kevin Bacon not being qualified, and them thinking like, oh, he's not qualified. No, they didn't care. Yeah. Everybody is just as qualified as everyone else.
Also, real quick on that argument about like whether or not, and this is a sort of constant bugaboo of mine. But people who say things like, I'm absolutely certain that America should not have dropped the bomb, that it was the wrong thing to do, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's such an easy stance to take, right? Like 150 some odd thousand Japanese are killed seemingly unnecessarily because there's an argument that if the U.S. convinces Russia to declare war on the Empire of Japan, which they had yet to do at that point, that Japan would have folded. There's a semi-compelling counter-argument to that, which is that the Japanese never fucking quit. And it's not clear that they were going to.
Why can't it be just what it is, which is like, it's a fucked up thing to drop that bomb on a populous city, but it was a fucked up thing that ended the war. And, like, I do wonder if the people that lived during that time and they had these concerns, like, well, you can't unring this bell, right? Basically, kind of like the Oppenheimer guy, like, oh, shit, this is going to start a chain reaction. Won't be long before the Russians get it, despite what Truman thought. Won't be long before other countries in the future get it. And then you're going to have this problem. Turns out, worked out pretty well. Like, no one's really used it, right? We are...
Right. And so that's like... And not to, knock on wood, I suppose, as far as nobody's really used it yet.
We're in the clear.
But we're certainly not that. We're still living in a time where there are these enormous weapons, and not all of them are as secured as you would expect them to be, right? Especially given the fall of the Soviet Union and the concerns about how many of those weapons have been properly taken care of in the time since, not to mention the fact that the United States and Russia just continue to make these things year after year.
And you have countries that are like, they could destabilize, like Pakistan, and they have it, so like some non-state actor could get their hands on this at some point, right?
Right. It could be very, very bad, and who knows. But to some extent, and this is my argument sort of about the American century writ large, like for everything you can say about fucking awful hegemonic American power over the last 75 years or whatever the correct time frame is.
And you can say a lot
for this sort. Yeah, you can say a lot. It's bad news. This Russia v. Ukraine is the first meaningful European land war since World War II, basically, right? I mean, they're skirmishes, I suppose, through the years. But, like, having the big bad in America and this power, and we displayed and deployed that power in unimaginably inhumane ways at the end of World War II, with the rationale or the justification being that perhaps it will save American lives to not have to go invade Japan to force them to surrender. But ultimately, like, as someone who I don't believe that we're in the most perfect world, but I certainly do believe that it could be a whole hell of a lot worse, right? And there's just no way of knowing what failing to use those bombs in that scenario would have changed about human history over the course of the last 75 years. And that doesn't absolve whatever sin is on Harry Truman or Oppenheimer himself for the decision to make and then drop those bombs. Those sins don't wash away just because I made that statement, right? I'm not morally absolving them of their culpability here in any way by suggesting that for all we know, shit could have been a whole lot worse. I think that's just true. Like, we just don't know what would have happened otherwise.
Right. But the one thing, again, going back to the point, like, to think that 80 years later there was no there was no other time where somebody like will end the war because of similar arguments Americans would make, like, oh, we would have killed more people on both ends if it was like having to go into the country and fight it out for like another like year or two, right? So it's like the casualties would have been worse the other way, but like there's something about. And I don't know, is it like a rational thing to say, like, you can kill people in other ways, but you can't kill people in specific ways, right? Like, Dresden, a lot of people died there, right? That wasn't fun, right, for anybody. But it was done in a certain way. But if somebody dropped a bomb on Dresden, that would have been different. Like, there's something about, like, why does this way of death, like, change a calculation? Like, I mean, this is war. Millions of people have died.
I think it's just because there's so many innocent people.
Right.
Just,
I guess that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
That's, I think, the biggest.
Right. It's hard to imagine bombs of this size and the size that they built in the aftermath, like at the dawn of the Cold War, with the H bomb coming into becoming the main weapon of the Soviets and the United States. After that point, like, those are not, at least with the Dresden bombing, each one of those individual bombs, you could say, could be pointed at a specific military target of consequence. And that doesn't mean that they were in Dresden, right? It was a largely non-military target there. But there's no, in the same way that when we talk about the gun, like the reason the gun and the bullet exist and go together is because you want to take it and fire it at another human being, and then they die, right? Like, that's the purpose of the thing. The purpose of a hydrogen bomb is not to take out a specific military target for a specific military reason. It's, you want to have the biggest possible bomb to kill as many human beings as possible.
Mass destruction. Yeah.
Right. And so that's probably an important part of the difference.
Boy, good thing that guy who's making decisions, I don't know if it was a secretary of something, but like, oh, me and my wife honeymoon in this town, like Kyoto, let's not bomb them. Like, imagine surviving, making the cut because somebody went on vacation there once.
That is another perfect moment in that movie is that scene. I thought that was very well done.
Like, those moments, like, it stood out to her, like, this must have actually happened, because it's just such a random thing to include in a movie, just like Truman talking shit about what's his face, like, oh, this guy's a fucking wimp, get him out of my office. Like,
right. I think that moment is born out of a line in that guy's memoir or his autobiography or something, and not recorded from one particular conversation. But I'm pretty sure that the guy who says that in the movie, that comes from somebody's memoir.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Like, those two scenes in particular did not sound like artistic license, because it just would have, like, if we just made it up, like, what? Like,
it's way too crass to be anything but real life. Yeah. I forget why I ended up looking this up, but and I'm sure it had to do with something that I was reading about, some criticism about the movie. But I looked up the racial and ethnic demographics of the United States through history. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and I know that it's weird to be surprised by these sorts of things, I suppose. But the United States today, or according to the 2020 census, is 61.5% white, right?
Okay.
That's the United States today. That is the United States that is having an ongoing conversation about race, that is a white supremacist, patriarchal, awful hegemony of people who look like me, doing awful things to all of the minorities. That's a country that is 61.6% white. In the 1940s, when this was all taking place, the United States... Do you know the answer to this, what I'm about to say? Or should I phrase this as an over-under?
I'm going to take
a guess?
Over 61%. Lock it in.
Yes, it is over 61. I want you to just take a stab at it.
So the state of Georgia went from like 70+% white in like around the time we were born in the early 80s to like 50% like right now. So like it dropped like 20 plus points, right? So I wonder if there's a similar drop. I'm going to say we're talking about like early 40s, like during this. Oh,
yeah.
God. 76% white.
The answer is over 76%. It is 89.8% white in 1940.
All right.
This country was so fucking white so recently. Like, when my parents are of the 1960s, 1960 census, 88.6% white in 1960. When we're born, the early 1980s, 83.1% white, and now 61.6% white. There's that old line about how the generals are always fighting the last war, right? Like the reason that you lose this war is that you're fighting you're using the lessons of the last war to fight this war, and this is a new war, so you're fucked, right? This entire convulsion that we're going through is going to be, and I know that people like me, or who look like me, who are much more awful than me, I guess, who are dismissive of all of these concerns about racism and whatnot, would perhaps make a similar sort of argument to what I'm about to say here. And what are you going to do? But our concerns in this moment are going to be so utterly mystifying to people of 2060, right? Like if you just follow the trend line, just since our parents were born, we've gone from roughly 90% white to 60% white. That is and by the way, that's a massive change just in terms of everything, right? So it is the case that white hegemony was a thing that you could be critical of when you're looking back at the 1950s, but it's becoming increasingly ridiculous to make any of these sorts of arguments now. And you need look almost no further than just the raw demographic numbers to know it. And yeah, are there problems with who's in charge and where the money is and all of the rest of that? Yes, for now. But guess what? That's also going to be sorted, right? As if there's one thing that this country is actually pretty good at, it is the great resort of having capital and resources accrue at the people who are able to produce. Like it's just sort of
I'm confused about the point you're trying to make.
In what way?
What just like say it with less words.
That in 2010 the United States was 72% white. In 2020 it's 61% white. When we were born it was 83% white. When my parents were born it was 90% white. When their parents were born it was even more closer to 90% white. You're saying it with
as many words. What is I understand the statistics. What are you saying about it?
We are a culture fully obsessed with questions of race and ethnicity, and in 30 or 40 years
we're going
to be looking around going, what the fuck were they talking about?
Okay.
Why were they so obsessed with this thing?
So you're saying if we just calm down.
So obviously getting better right before their eyes. Like when I said about the generals fighting the last war, we have a whole generation of people who were raised to be civil rights warriors whose fucking war is past. I hate to break it to you, but you won, and it's good, and it's going to be even better in 30 years, and it won't be because you got mad at Don McNeil for pronouncing the bad syllables, right? Like none of the things that you're doing, like The French Connection is a movie that's in the culture a little bit at the moment because the guy who directed it, William Friedkin, died. He's like fucking an old school Hollywood guy. He directed The Exorcist. He directed The French Connection and a bunch of other movies, but those are probably his two best movies. And earlier this summer, Disney owns The French Connection or the distribution rights to it or something, and so they sent it out to the Criterion Channel, and they aired a version of it where this morally somewhere between ambiguous and depraved character in the movie uses the N-word. This is a couple of cops talking about criminals, and they use the N-word in reference, like they call them the N-word. They use it in the bad way, right? There's no getting around it. They use it in the way that is not good. They don't just say it, they use it, and it's bad. But they took that out. They took the word out in order to more comport with today's cultural mores or sensibilities or whatever, and in so doing deprived us of a full picture of who this character is supposed to be and where we can place this film in our cultural history. And then it leaves you wondering, like, okay, so but then what's the big deal, right? And so but these are the things that this whole generation is so concerned about in this moment that won't make any sense whatsoever to people in fairly short order.
I'm curious, so replaced it with what? Like, did they replace it with another word?
I forget the dialogue. Okay, they just moved it around a little bit and then changed they removed the word entirely. Like I can pull it up.
You know,
just give me a second.
what's interesting is I was just watching the Jerk with Steve, what's his face, and there were a couple of references to the N-word, and that was still in the HBO, wherever I watched it. Like, they didn't remove that. So I don't know why they're being kind of random about which ones they remove the words out of. It kind of worked pretty well.
This is from the New York Times write-up of this from back in July, and I was reminded of it because of William Friedkin's death. Two narcotics cops, Jimmy Doyle, played by Gene Hackman, and Buddy Russo, played by Roy Scheider, are at the precinct following an undercover operation during which a drug dealer ended up slashing Russo with a knife. The injury has left Russo struggling to put on his coat. Need a little help there? Doyle chuckles, then adds an ethnic jab. You dumb guinea.
You dumb guinea.
How the hell did I know he had a knife?
Never trust a nigger.
He could have been white.
Never trust anyone.
Then he invites Russo out for a drink, and they trade masturbation jokes as they head through the door. But perhaps you should forget that I mentioned any of this, because you're now a lot less likely to see it in the film. In June, viewers of the Criterion Channel streaming version noticed that much of the scene had been edited out without announcement or comment. People viewing via Apple TV and Amazon found the same. It was reported that the version available on Disney Plus in Britain and Canada remains unedited, suggesting that whoever authorized the cut imagined the moment to be unfit for American audiences in particular. Blah, 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 blah. The domestic market now sees a slapdash sequence that has Russo entering the room, clutching his forearm, followed by a jerky jump to the door where Doyle waits. The disparaging exchange is, of course, omitted. What remains is a glitch, a bit of hesitation, the suggestion of something amiss. Never trust anyone, indeed. Anyway, we didn't talk about that when it happened because it felt like we'd been talking about that exact same story half a dozen times in relation to other things, like the, what's his name, the giant peach guy. But anyway.
So, do you think that, because to me, I don't understand this approach, because I would imagine that you would want to just show the movie as it was, just like you would want to teach history as it happened, right? Like, you don't want to accommodate some present-day sensibility. Like, oh, I don't want to hear about this, or I don't want to hear a word, or I don't want to hear about that thing that happened. Like, to me, this sounds like, what do you mean? Like, just this is the movie. It came out at this time, and yes, the sensibilities are different, but that's how it was then. Like, why would you want to pretend?
Right, and I've made the argument before about how it removes its relevance as a cultural or historical artifact if you've now, with the modern editing knife, gone in and changed it to reflect today's values. Like, I don't need to repeat that. I think that is clear. It's just that this is the thing that we focus all of our attention on now, and I think it will be utterly incomprehensible. I hope, anyway. Right. Like, that's my hope, is that this all of this concern about all of this bullshit, where all we're concerned about is the appearance of a thing and whose feelings are going to be hurt by a thing, and like the pretending about feelings that are going to be hurt by a thing. All of it feels like such nonsensical play acting that it's pretending to be serious about the world in a way that the underlying understanding of it is, we know that you're not actually being serious about this, right? Like, that is the thing that I think most drives me insane about conversations around political correctness. Because, like, so Kamala Harris got into it with Ron DeSantis because there was this thing about how there was a line in the Florida history curriculum around slavery,
like the upsides to slavery.
Where, right, like out of a list of 180 bullet points or something on this particular section talking about American slavery, there was a note in there, which, not that it matters, but for the record was inserted by an historian who happens to be an African-American man, a black man, noting that in some cases, a house slave, for example, would have had a slightly better life than a cotton-picking slave, and would have learned skills that they were then able to use in their lives, because slavery wasn't this monolithic thing that was just nothing but suffering and death for people. Instead, it was a life. It wasn't a good life, but it was an experience of a full life by full human beings, right? And you know what full human beings are capable of doing in unimaginably bad circumstances? They're capable of taking something positive from the absolute worst experiences of their lives, right? You can, I mean, it's gross to even think about it, but like, you've heard stories about mothers saying that, yeah, I was raped, but I wouldn't change it for the world because I got my son or my daughter out of it, right? And is that a rationalization to some extent? But yeah, but it doesn't mean that they're not absolving their rapist of the crime against them in that sense, right? Like, to some extent, we fucking take the lemons and we make goddamn lemonade out of them. It's what we do. It's why we thrived. We've done it better than any other species on the history of the planet. And will continue to do so. And to suggest that you cannot take small amounts of good from unimaginably bad circumstances is to tell a lie about the way that the human species has maintained through the years.
Well, you know, I guess, yeah, the larger point that humans persevere even in trying times is a good one. Like, what is the context that this information is presented? Because, you know, you point to the rape situation where a baby can come out of that heinous act and just say, you know, the kid is good or whatever. But, like, I liken this to, if saying any upside to slavery to me sounds like a bizarre thing to say, because during, like, let's say the second...
I don't think... so I disagree. I agree with you. If you're going to frame it as an upside to slavery, then yes, that's wrong. But if you make clear this absolutely... at best amoral, like, it's hard to imagine it. Like, the fact that they're able to frame it in a moral framework, and that the Christian religion has managed to do that with slavery because slavery appears in the Bible, right? Yes. So, like, there is a way that people try to frame slavery as an immoral act, but to me, it exists beyond the bounds of normal morality in any conceivable way. It is a completely unacceptable thing to do to enslave a fellow human being. So yeah, when you frame it as the upside to slavery is that they learned how to shoe a horse, and then this guy got to become a blacksmith in his later life.
But again, what I would compare, bringing that point up, like, in a vacuum, yes, you can learn something. While you're subjected as something less than a human, that's a point, I guess. But to me, that would be like saying during the Japanese assaults on China, and they're doing these experiments, and they glean some scientific information from just fucking injecting things into humans who are under their captivity, and they learn a thing. Oh, that's not bad. All of that torture, we learned one extra thing. To me, it would be like bringing that point up. It's like, okay, but what context are you presenting this information? Yeah, you can glean information by doing heinous things. Right.
And that's fine. Again, I'm perfectly comfortable having that conversation. I think that is a worthwhile conversation to have. It requires a very specific context of slavery was an absolute moral evil. It was depravity and completely unacceptable. And also, this is a story of African-American triumph, ultimately, because despite this, they have persevered, and people, you are descended from some of the strongest-willed and capable human beings to ever walk the face of the earth, right? By nature of the worst imaginable sort of Darwinism that you can even conceive of,
but
right?
Everybody, too, right? I mean, if you go back to different periods of time, somebody was getting screwed over, and they persevered. And
right, absolutely, yes.
We are looking around humans, I think that, are the cream of the crop.
Right, but I'm fine with people having the conversation on the other side, which is even giving any sort of light to this is completely. I disagree. I just disagree. What I cannot stand is somebody like Kamala Harris getting on stage and being like, "Oh, that Ron DeSantis wants to tell all the kids that slavery was good." Actually, right? That's how depraved Ron DeSantis is. Nobody believes that Kamala Harris believes that that's what Ron DeSantis believes, right? That's the artifice and the we're just pretending here. We're pretending towards seriousness when in fact there are other things that we could be concerning ourselves with that actually matter in the world, and none of them have to do with some fucking academic committee in Florida deciding to inject into their curriculum the idea that some black folks learned how to shoe a horse during slavery. Anyway, I don't know how we made it there from Oppenheimer, but what are you going to do?
Because there were a lot of white people before.
Oh, by the way, to that point, so like just a little context, like in the 60s, like LBJ, after what's-his-face died, he passed a lot of things, like, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, all that stuff. One of the things he passed was an Immigration Act. And apparently before then, they had restrictive quotas depending on where you came from. So not everybody came to Ellis Island from all over the world, right? They were like, in Asia, like, oh, fuck that, you're not coming here. Africa, you're not coming.
The Chinese Restriction Act or something like
the
that,
Exclusion Act and all that stuff. So, like, the Immigration Act in 65 got rid of all of those things. And so that's why the numbers went the other way. And so, yeah, you're right. The good news is you're right. Like, in like 30, 40 years from now, this current way of thinking about things will not make a lot of sense. The only problem will be we'll be arguing about something else. Like, it's not like things will just be better. Like, there seems to be this need to have these arguments about things. And so, like, we'll just be arguing about some other thing. So it's not like it'll be like kumbaya in 30 years.
What are we going to do when when we lose the boogeyman that is the hegemonic white male, like, which you still see constantly in media, is portrayed as like the worst thing in the world, the white supremacy, the white male. There was a piece in the Times a couple weeks ago. This Asian lady moved to France during the pandemic, and she's talking about how good it feels to finally be in a country where she feels like a white male. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you, lady? What are you talking about? But like, what are we going to do when we lose that as the cultural boogeyman? Or will we never? Will we continue to uphold him as the ultimate powerful evil that we're all constantly striving against, even as whiteness, whatever that means to people? This isn't my fucking language, people, but it slips below 50% and then probably settles around, I don't know, 30 or 40% of America will be considered non-Hispanic whites by the time I'm dead, something along those lines.
Right, but I suspect that, yes, hate thrives on, like, hardware, like, you look different than I look, right? But it also thrives on software, like, you believe this thing that I don't believe in, right? I mean, there's been a lot of hate between people who they're all like, those English and Irish. I mean, to me, what's the difference, right? But they hated each other because they believed Jesus slightly differently, right?
Right.
So it's like,
well, you look at
that's not going to change.
So you Google up the most diverse countries in the world, and you end up with Liberia. Right now, top of your head, you're like, wait, Liberia? What do you mean most diverse? But it's because 95% of their population is made up of something like 17 or 18 different tribes, right? So these are considered ethnically and racially diverse people based on the fact that they are of different tribes and they speak different languages. And yes, that's all well and good and true. But is that is that the sort of inherent diversity that we think is an inherent good in any plausible way? Like, and further, so you would. A weird thought that I had was that, like, going to Liberia and saying there's a black guy and saying that that's his race is as dumb as going to the United States and saying there's a white guy and saying that tells me everything I need to know about his racial and ethnic makeup. It's as absurd, right? The kid who grows up in Boston versus the kid who grows up on the potato farm in Idaho versus the kid who grows up in rural Mississippi. Those are as meaningfully different cultures in ways that matter to those three people as the three different tribes in Liberia are. Right, and maybe I'm completely wrong about that. And to an extent, we have like a national media and a more nationalized culture. But I think in the ways that those people their experience of the world, I'm not sure that that's an entirely bad thought. But
the thing is, no matter what, like, hate finds a way, right? So, like, if it's not along, like I said, racial lines. I mean, you currently are seeing this trend towards political ideology being the black versus white, right? So, like, there are shorthand indicators that you're on this side or on that side. If you have a decal obviously that's pretty obvious. If you have like a MAGA decal versus some, I don't know, whatever thing is popular these days on the other side. But like, there are also like where people are living, what people are driving, what people are watching. It's like two different worlds, right? And so like the animus can be on that front instead of like what it used to be, which is around racial lines, right? So like, there's going to be some conflict. It'll just be around political ideology versus like tribes, like in other parts of the world, right?
Well, it's rural, urban.
Yeah.
It's just two
Right.
things.
Yeah, it's the NPR class versus everybody else, I think, is ultimately where we're headed. All right, I want to play a clip from a John Ronson book. The John Ronson book is
This is the last thing we're doing
Them.
because it's late.
It's not that late.
It's going to be when you get done talking.
No, this is along the same lines as the conversation we've been having.
And it's the last part of it.
Have you... Jesus fucking Christ. Have you ever read Them by John Ronson?
I don't know. I think I have the book.
It was his like Adventures with Extremists.
Okay.
And he's going around and by the way, first off, everyone should go listen to you get on Audible on Amazon or just buy the book. In a weird way, his going around the world and talking to different extremist groups and the leaders of these extremist movements very much speaks to this moment. And this was a book that came out some 25 years ago, I believe. But here's a quick clip from that I found particularly revelatory about today.
I was surprised to hear from Jack that the first thing Randy Weaver yelled through the cabin walls at him, the very first thing he yelled to the outside world, having been under siege for a week, was not, "They killed Vicky, they killed my bride." That was the second thing he yelled. It was not, "I've been shot too." That was the third thing he yelled. The first thing he yelled was, "Why is the radio calling me a white supremacist when those are not my views?"
All right, so this is about Randy
Ruby
Weaver,
Ridge?
who was the guy who was under siege at Ruby Ridge.
Okay.
And Ronson is describing the first thing that Randy Weaver says to someone who finally makes contact with him after a week of this siege going on. And rather than express horror at the murder of his wife or whatever other thing, or the fact that he had been shot, instead he says, "Why are they describing me on the radio as a white supremacist when that's not what I believe?" And I'm going to play the clip again just cuz.
I was surprised to hear from Jack that the first thing Randy Weaver yelled through the cabin walls at him, the very first thing he yelled to the outside world, having been under siege for a week, was not, "They killed Vicky, they killed my bride." That was the second thing he yelled. It was not, "I've been shot too." That was the third thing he yelled. The first thing he yelled was, "Why is the radio calling me a white supremacist when those are not my views?"
All right. And I play it twice because, to me, it's like heartbreaking in a stupid way. Because this is... I mean, Randy Weaver wasn't a particularly bright guy by any light, by any understanding of him. That doesn't fucking matter. And there's a tendency online now, I've noticed in the last little while, to use people who are still talking about Ruby Ridge as shorthand for psychos. Like because you are someone who is concerned about government overreach in this particular scenario, you must be a bad person, right? And I truly don't understand that level of tribalization. And
doesn't the context, like the sequence of events, is probably why there's that association, right? Because it was like Ruby Ridge, the Waco fiasco, and then like that McVeigh guy took those two incidents as inspiration for the attack in Oklahoma City, right? So like this an argument could be made that many people can support that's against the what the law enforcement did. Like I think they were like trying to like get him on like some gun charges on like some weird setup kind of thing, to where like he said something that he's selling something illegal so that the ATF can barge in and get him, right? They're doing this thing.
It wasn't so the whole gun charge thing was a front to get him to flip on the Aryan Nation types, right? They knew that he had been in contact with bad people, and so they set him up to commit a gun crime for somebody that he thought was a friend, in order to then force him to flip as an informant on, to like go as an undercover informant on the Aryan Nation types, which he just like wasn't going to do. Like, fuck you. I'm going to go hide out in my cabin instead. Fuck you.
Hide out long enough so his wife died, but he surrendered. He should have died himself. I mean, what is he doing? Like, if you're going to go that way, I mean, not to be critical, but like, you're supposed to be holed up to death.
Well,
and like,
you say for his wife to die. His wife was shot for no reason by federal U.S. law enforcement.
That's true. That should have further cemented his stance. Like, he gave in. Like,
well,
what was the whole point of this exercise?
He still had two kids in there.
He had that before him. Anyway, that guy's a bum. But what is there a word for like a good argument, but because it's an argument that galvanizes like an unsavory set of people, like you're not like, I'm not going to take a proactive step to mention that. Is
it the Kaczynski? Is that what we call that?
Because it's like the only people that ever invoke those two things, you know, Ruby Ridge and Waco, are like people that believe in those kind of like separatist kind of like right wing.
Right. What I think Ronson's book is particularly good at is humanizing people that we are very accustomed to dehumanizing. That we are. It's the same thing that Oppenheimer does in a certain way with the Robert Downey Jr. character. These are people who are, at the same time that they are masters of the universe, they are the greatest boogeymen imaginable, they are the great men of history. Also, at the same time, they are small and pathetic and desperately in need of a hug human beings, right? These are just fucking people at the end of the day. And Randy Weaver, no doubt loved his wife, no doubt loved his children, but in that moment when he's talking to the outside world for the first time in a week, is deeply injured by the fact that the radio's calling him a white supremacist when that's not actually how I feel, right? And that's a deeply human thing to be feeling in that moment. And I think it sort of explains the entire last 8 years. And therefore, I guess if it also explains 1995 and the extremists that John Ronson was talking to 30 years ago, maybe it just explains an even bigger picture than what I'm capable of seeing at the moment. But maybe the entire trumpeting can be understood at least a little bit more by the fact that Randy Weaver comes out of his cabin and demands to know why the radio is calling him a white supremacist when that's not how he actually feels in his heart. Like that, that might just, and I'm not going to explain it further, but that might just sum things up in an important way, and I'm not entirely sure how.
And I suspect, you know, this is like a recurring thing with humans where, like, you try to, like if you successfully other somebody, then you can dismiss all, you know, anything else they say, no matter how valid the point or a valid an experience that they went through.
There's also, like, Katie, I think the most upset she gets is when she feels misunderstood. Like, she gets...
Yeah, people hate that.
She hates it when she's been mischaracterized or misunderstood. Like, it bothers her as much as anything. It's funny.
And we live in a time now, in the information and internet age, the social media age, when everyone believes that they fully understand their enemies completely and don't need to hear anything else from them, and simply talk amongst themselves and say, no, we have this all figured out. We don't even need to hear from you. There's nothing that you can say in your defense, and anything that you say in your defense is just digging your own hole deeper. And that is the sort of artifice and the pretending to seriousness that drives me crazy.
Right, but there is an upside to not having to think about the other view. You can just be like, fuck those people.
Unrelated. There was an article in the New York Times opinion section this weekend, or maybe it was the business section, actually. It said, we're all water bottle freaks. Americans are drinking more water. How best to contain it? That's the burning question. I believe I've expressed on the show before,
you have,
but maybe
sure.
not. my intuition, this feeling that I had that everyone has these fucking flasks, these Nalgene's and the Camelbacks and the what are the other brands that are out there? There's the Yeti brand, which is very popular with the bougie set. And then there's all of the different Starbucks ones that people have. Very nice, fancy water bottles that people have, certainly.
Or the very basic jug of water that those gym bros
No,
have.
people don't have that.
No. We're talking specifically about the like fucking $35 for a fancy aluminum and steel water flask or plastic or whatever. And my feeling has long been that people have these fucking bottles, but it's not replacing the purchasing of the single-use plastic refillable water bottle. Instead, it's just like this weird other supplement. It's just this thing that we're buying in addition to being incredibly wasteful. And I've said before, I'm certain I've said this on the show before, we should issue every goddamn breathing American.
Who is we?
The federal government.
The federal government. Okay. So on the heels of you talking about government overreach, you're suggesting...
Yes, I
okay.
happily admit this is and acknowledge that this is perhaps my single strongest fascistic stance.
This is what the Founding Fathers had in mind.
That's right.
This sort of
they didn't know it. They didn't know it. But if they could come back, they would say yeah.
Everyone should be issued a Nalgene or a stainless steel.
One of each, I think. I think one plastic and one metal.
Sure, perhaps one of each. Perhaps one for hot and one for cold, if that's necessary to people's situation.
Okay, so 4.
And then there are no more goddamn single-use plastic bottles. We make the fucking rule. We're gonna phase them out, just like we're phasing out the plastic grocery bags in various municipalities or states, depending on your situation there. No more. We don't fucking need them because, and this is from the article, sales of single-serving water bottles have been rising steadily too, reaching 11.3 billion gallons in 2022. That's on the heels of $2 billion in reusable water bottles were sold in the United States in 2022, up from around 1.5 billion in 2020. So in just 2 years, the market for that grew by, depending on how you do the math, either 25% or 33%. I can never quite figure out which way they want me to do that math. But it went from 1.5 billion to 2 billion, which is an increase of $500 million in just 2 years. But at the same time that was happening, we sold more fucking Dasani and Aquafina and
because of your brother,
the fancy square ones. Stop it, people! Stop. We have, and yeah, there's a sort of problem, right? We have fucking 40 of these goddamn flasks upstairs.
No.
And we might well. I didn't count beforehand. Abe, how many do you have in your house?
I have at least one. I use one anyways. I'm sure I've been gifted others.
I use 2 right now are my main ones. I have my Nalgene, which replaced the Nalgene that I had for some 15 years, I believe we estimated.
He's almost lost it twice.
I have almost lost it, but I have not lost it, which is key to having a thing is almost losing it, but not. And then I also have my Yeti, which I use for coffee, generally speaking, although I use my Nalgene for coffee, too. If I had to pick just
both.
one, I would choose the Nalgene because I can make that work for just about everything.
No, you can't for hot.
I don't want hot coffee. I'm just drinking cold coffee now. It's totally fine.
It's not almost everything. If you can't drink half the beverages.
I will pour myself an old-fashioned into my goddamn Nalgene as necessary, whatever it takes.
You can do that into your Yeti as well.
Fine. If I had to pick, goddammit, I picked the Nalgene.
Pick the plastic one. I hear what you're saying.
Choice.
You'd pick the one made of plastic.
The Nalgene lasted me for 15 goddamn years, and I hope the next one does too. It's a fucking scourge. We went to the beach, and everybody had goddamn single-use water bottles.
They would pour them into their reusable ones. There was water that flowed for free out of the faucet, and they would still pour the plastic. It was very weird.
Is it indicative that we're just drinking more water? Is there like some sort of data point?
I'm sure we're drinking more water.
So maybe that's why both the disposable ones and the reusable ones.
But there's no reason to buy bottled water. It's the same thing as what comes out of the faucet.
Except, is there some? There seems to be this prejudice against tap water. Like some of my coworkers say the same thing. I'll refill my water bottle from the tap, but somebody will like, oh, what is that? That's like from the sink.
I don't know.
So I wonder if that's like
they think
some
it
sort
tastes
of
different
messaging that the evil water companies the water bottle companies came up with to where like
you're referring to the soda companies when you talk about the evil water companies, and that's all they are. They're all owned by PepsiCo or the Coca-Cola company. And yes, it is absolutely a bogus marketing ploy to suggest that there's some greater amount of purity in the Dasani than there is in whatever's coming out of the tap at the IRS office.
Right.
It's nonsense. Drink. I prefer cold water. I understand that instinct. That's why we keep a Brita in the refrigerator so that I can always have.
It's not even filtering anything.
I can always have cold water.
Old.
I replace the filter every few months.
Do you?
Yes.
I assumed it was just like not.
No, I replace the filter.
Good.
But yeah, even that is like, sure, I'll replace the filter, but like it doesn't. I'm not worried about the impurities in the tap water. It's just that the water is going to sit there for maybe half a day before I drink it. So maybe using the filter is better. But like, I do not understand the prejudice against the tap water.
Yeah.
There's a tiny percentage of people who are poisoned by the lead pipes in this country. It's largely not a problem.
They mostly figure that out. Yeah, it's
and the
safe.
water that you're getting isn't coming from the top of some perfect mountain. And even if it was, like,
it's just tap water somewhere else.
Are we living in awful climate times or not, with the weird pollutants in all of the rain and the acid rain and all the rest of it? Like, how do you know that that's even good water?
In your
some of it's alkanized.
In your scheme, that's doomed to fail, because of how people respond to like changing the type of light bulb or like this gas stove. Like all those initiatives have gone through without any issue. I'm sure people will receive your idea the same way. But like, what happens a few generations? Like all the existing bottles now are in circulation, and you just hand me down it to the kids. Like if you phase it out by the end of this decade, let's say,
we'll be dead before that.
And then by the end of this decade, but like in the future, like I'm gonna do hand-me-downs. I can't buy my own if I was a young kid.
I mean, yeah, sure, you can buy your own, but there has to be some sort of limiting principle at work here, right? We can't just have, and I've said before about the single-use plastic bottles. Like, I want to see the actual price of these things reflected in the price at checkout, right? And so I've gotten to the point where, like, I used to buy, when I would go to the grocery store, and I was drinking more soda then anyway, so it's sort of maybe this isn't entirely fair, but you could get a Diet Coke at the grocery store checkout for like $1, right? Like back in the day. At Costco used to have a Coke machine on the way out of the store that would sell you a 20-ounce bottle of Coke
for the $1. Water was 25 cents.
Yeah, the water is still $0.25, but they used to have the Coke machine that would sell you the 20-ounce bottle of Coke for $1, just like you used to be able to get fucking 20 years ago when you go to the gas station or the grocery store.
The vending machine
checkout.
Around the store from my work, still 50-cent sodas.
Oh, wow.
It's back in time. You go back to the 90s on the side of the convenience store next to work.
The point here is that it's now like $2.19 maybe, or $2.29 to buy a cold 20-ounce Diet Coke at the grocery store checkout line, which is like fucking outrageous, especially considering like just 100 yards in the other direction you can get a 2-liter for like I think about that same price probably. But of course, I don't want a 2-liter. I want to drink a ice-cold Coca-Cola in the time that it takes me to get from the grocery store checkout back to my house. Like, that's what I'm buying there, is the convenience. But I don't do it nearly as much anymore because it's $2.29 instead of just $1. $1? Fuck yeah. Who cares? It's just $1. $2.29 is like, I mean, is it a lot of money? No, but it feels to me like too much money for that level of convenience that then it's just wasteful on top of it. And I wonder if part of what's working on my brain is like that $2.29 better reflects the actual cost of the thing in terms of disposal, and therefore I'm not going to buy it. Maybe that's what's working on my brain.
Right.
and so I'm buying less of it. I think we need to encourage more of that. Everything should be fucking $5-6 a pop if it's just going to end up in the goddamn trash. And that's how you stop people from wasting so much shit all the time.
That could work.
The alternative, I guess, is to like reinstitute these like buyback programs that they have, where like in California, I think still, and in some other places, it's like they charge you an extra 50 cents for every piece of shit single-use thing that you get, and you only get that 50 cents back when you recycle the thing. But that's an imperfect system too, because the recycling just ends up in the goddamn landfill anyway. So I don't know what problem that's solving.
Maybe the hassle of going through that whole thing is going to discourage people from
similarly discouraging you from just buying the single-use shit. I don't know. And I've seen it play out on my own children's faces. Like we got Gatorade squeezy bottles at the start of the Little League season last year. Like it was part of the gear that I handed out to the kids. They got a uniform baseball cap, they got a uniform shirt, and then also with all of the stuff, they were supposed to get a reusable squeezy Gatorade bottle. Like you see the pros have on the side of the field where they got that one water boy whose whole job is to come out and just squirt water into the football players' mouths or what have you.
That's actually the type of water bottle I use. So much easier.
Right. And so the kids were all excited to get one of those, but I only got 12 and my team had 13 kids on it. So I, of course, as any good father will do, I shorted my own kid. Right. I said... I made sure all the other kids had one, and then my daughter didn't get one because I was like, look, we've got fucking 40 of these things at home anyway, in some form or fashion, and it's going to be fine. She was fucking heartbroken to not get the squeezy Gatorade bottle just like all of her teammates got, and I had to promise her that Daddy was going to go on Amazon and buy a squeezy, even though we already have 40 of the fucking things, not quite exactly the same. I have to buy this one so that she can have one just like her teammates.
She's already the only girl on the team.
Right.
Sure. I understand. But it's like she didn't want it because like what she wanted was to possess the thing, right? And that's how they get you with all these fucking water bottles.
Well, and she wanted to be like everybody else. Everybody else got one.
Yeah.
Sure. And it obviously it was an injustice happening, right? Like everybody else got one and I didn't, and that's not fucking fair. And I fully understand that. But at the same time, the psychology at play there, I think, also has to do with like that sort of that consumerist instinct that we all sort of have or have had cultivated in us, which is like, I want the thing that exists because it exists, not because it fills a particular need or I'm going to do better in the world by having this thing that I didn't have before, but simply because here is a thing and I want that thing. The same reason that we have subscriptions to half a dozen streaming services that we hardly watch.
Right. And to Laura, like what Laura said, also because people just want to be like other people. I think that's why all these people are walking around with these bottles in the first place. Like it's like with the coffee thing. Like I've seen people at work like walk around with coffee in the morning and they're like nursing it still like 2-3 hours later. It's like, come on, you're done with that coffee. But they just see people like it's a thing. Like people walk around with a coffee cup, and I think the water bottle is a similar thing where they see other people do it. They're like, shit, I guess I'll do it too. And here we are. I
guess. I think that you can solve a huge portion of this problem simply by having more public facilities that offer refillable water bottles situations. Like you go to Disney, and we were at Disney, and I think I saw one.
They really want you to buy the water.
They desperately want you to buy the fucking $4 and $4 and a quarter.
It's like they're a business. It's like they're making money.
Like, fuck that. You're in Florida. Just have cold water on tap readily available. Coca-Cola's going to get theirs just fine. You don't have to bend to the knee of goddamn the Coca-Cola company who wants to sell a bunch of single-use waters to all these people. Like, the water that does come out of the refillable stations is not very pleasant, right? It's made purposefully so. It's not
conspiracy
cold.
Afoot, definitely.
I mean, I know you're saying that sarcastically, but it's literally true. They don't want you to have a successful or a pleasant experience of just refilling your own water bottle. They want you to spend $4 6 different times that day in the 100-degree heat, and that's fucking shitty.
At quick service restaurants, you can get free ice water as much as you want.
Yeah,
Right.
but still, like that means you have to wait in line, and no doubt they like the reason that they want you to wait in line and get the free cup of ice or ice water is because they know that you're also as long as I'm here and I waited in line for 8 minutes, I might as well get the pretzel bites or the corn dog nuggets or whatever the fuck.
Right.
I get it. It's an enterprise. We're all out here to make money, but you could make the world like talk about actually solving problems that fucking matter. Like readily available public bathrooms and refillable drinking water stations,
Like at airports.
In all of our major cities and airports would make the world 1,000 times better.
They have them at airports.
Just being a human being in the world would be better with that one simple modification, and it would take literally no political will whatsoever. Like people would fucking love that shit.
Oh, Republicans wouldn't like that.
Somebody would cry about it. I bet you somebody would
You
cry
shouldn't
about
have.
it. Oh, more
No,
freedoms.
it's infrastructure, and you don't want to spend money because why should I have to pay for someone else's water? Republicans wouldn't like it. You know it.
I disagree. I think that even Republicans would appreciate public facilities that allow you to get a cold sip of water.
They don't like public facilities as a concept.
Yeah, the worst of them do not. The most obnoxious of them do not. And in the same way that the absolute worst people in Kansas are going to win primaries on the backs of never an abortion ever in our state, but 60% of the population is going to show up and say we're actually going to have abortions. Like the vast silent middle is actually fairly sensible and just wants the world to be a better place. You've been listening to Cast Iron Brains, a podcast with Bob and Abe. Find the show on Facebook or Twitter, I guess. Head on over to brainiron.com or castironbrains.com for a show note. Also, email the show, brainironpodcast@gmail.com, as did listener and frequent commenter on the show, Corey,
Yay!
in the last week, to let us know that he also plays Mölkky. And because we were discussing the fun beach/yard game Mölkky on the show last week, which suggests to me that the crossover between Mölkky fans and Cast Iron Brains fans
huge.
is enormous.
It's
that
massive.
The correlation between those two audiences
It's like half.
is as high as almost any other correlation imaginable, right? Like the people who enjoy the game Mölkky and Cast Iron Brains, it's practically you see those Venn diagrams.
Yep.
It's a fucking circle. That's where this should become a Mölkky podcast, and perhaps
I'm for it.
Our audience would grow. Corey wanted to say that he and his compatriots who play the game with him have devised a rule that answers Chris's problem with the game, which is that there are no rebuttals in the game. And I agree with Corey.
I like Corey's
to an
idea.
extent, I agree with Chris as well. But the
Fuck
game,
Chris, though.
as we were playing it, was one thing. And I agree, it could be modified, but that we weren't playing a modified game. But yes, Corey's system of modification, that is a absolute thumbs up, Corey. Well done.
Corey would be
by
good at
you.
that. He's good at stuff.
Yeah, of course. The opening and closing themes of the show were composed by Mark Gillig, tetramermusic.com, TETRAMER music.com. For more from him, Abe, you let slip that you went to a movie theater in Kansas City in order to watch The Meg 2, which upon first seeing the trailer for that movie, Lori believed it was a parody of some sort and not an actual movie. Instead was just some awful commercial that they put at the beginning of the movies before the actual previews start. But no, in fact, they made this movie about like prehistoric sharks that come out from the center of the earth and then like gobble up other prehistoric creatures or something along those lines. How
More
was
or
it, Abe?
less. So just so there's no confusion, this was not a good movie. So no surprise there. Not a particularly good movie, but it was entertaining. So I'm now realizing that, I have AMC's subscription for watching movies, and most of the movies that I watch are through that subscription. But on occasion, like an Oppenheimer, in Atlanta, we don't have a big IMAX screen. The only IMAX screen that's any good is with Regal, the other company. So I would pay out of pocket to watch movies on occasion, like I did with the Tom Cruise movie, Mission Whatever, and Oppenheimer, and James Cameron's Avatar 2.
Big event movies you would pay a little bit extra for. Sir, tell me, if where you're going with this story is that your AMC A-list pass did not get you into this one, but you had to pay extra for it, my level of respect for you might reach new lows.
So the Meg 2 is added to the list of out-of-pocket expense movies.
Oh, my God.
Because, in my defense, there wasn't a theater, an AMC theater that was... This was at work. We were so close to the office that we just used Uber, so we didn't rent a car for work because our hotel... So I'm not going to get an Uber to watch a movie that's like 20 miles away, wherever in Kansas City. There's a movie theater across the screen... across the street from my hotel room. Like, I'm looking at it, and it's like right there. I can just go downstairs. And
you didn't have to walk across the street.
Now,
though,
that's an argument I have no answers for, right? Yes, I could have just not watched the movie, right? That's a solution, right? But
you could have rented one in the hotel.
So the reason why that I was drawn to it is because, like, I've never heard of B&B Theaters. It's some stupid fucking family chain. And it turned out that theater used to be an Alamo or whatever, which we don't have in Atlanta. And so I was like, let me see what all the hubbub is with the Alamo types. And I could see why they left, because there's only like 3 screens, and one of them is like good, like a good size. And that's where the Meg 2 showed. It's a very nice screen. And I'm just watching this shitty movie with like 10 other people. It wasn't a full theater. So I just went there for the experience. I knew going in. I've seen Meg 1, or the Meg, or whatever the fuck it was called. So I wasn't expecting anything. I will say, though, I know sharks are like supposed to be menacing and whatever, but if you just look at them, they just have a derpy, fucking stupid face.
Oh, no, they're very scary.
They don't... If they didn't have all that power, you would just laugh at them.
No, I wouldn't. I'm scared.
So not worth seeing, I'm guessing? Not
unless you happen to be stuck on a work trip and there's a theater across the street from you and you're doing nothing else. I would say just wait for the streaming. But I paid like $27. Actually, I got like a popcorn and a drink, which I usually don't do. I think I spent a lot of money there watching a shitty movie.
Well, sometimes you got to treat yourself, Abe.
On the streaming front, I watched on the plane, one of the planes that I was on, there's a Steph Curry documentary about like him coming up on Apple. And I realized, this is obviously not Michael Jordan's fault, but we're like in the golden...
So it's what you're telling me is there's a Steph Curry commercial on Apple TV.
Yeah, we're in the golden age of sports documentary propaganda. And I'm...
it's a good time for it, like right before football starts.
Yeah, and the timing is a little weird, but like it was fine. It's just like, I was a scrawny kid. I'm now like less scrawny, and I'm good at basketball. It was fine, but that was what I watched.
I took the kids to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem in the theaters because they had wanted to see it, and I was looking at my little Alamo app, and I realized that with Meg 2 debuting the next day, TMNT was going to be moved permanently out of the Dolby Atmos, the big screen that it's best to see movies in. And once it migrated away from the big screen, I don't think I would have bothered. So I was like, all right, fuck it, let's go. And we went and saw that, and that was a really good time. I actually really enjoyed that movie. I thought that was very well done. And that is despite the fact that I went in expecting to be annoyed because by the previews, it looked like it's like, okay, we're aiming for the kids this time.
Right.
Like it felt like it was aimed sort of squarely at the children, but it managed to sort of toe the line sort of down the middle where while attitudinally it was very much geared towards the less mature in the audience, the aesthetic of it and certainly the sounds that it made. There's a lot of like old school hip hop and rap from the 90s and mid 90s in that movie on the soundtrack. And then Ice Cube plays the big bad, plays the Superfly guy in an enjoyable fashion. I really enjoyed it. It was very well done. It's by the same guy who made Mitchells versus the Machines, which was an animated movie on Netflix a few years ago. And I think that it was interesting enough to look at that it made it all worthwhile and worth checking out. If
These
you have
kids love the
any
turtles
nostalgia
now. It's all they wanna
for that sort of
watch.
stuff. We are also we've watched the first episode of Hard Knocks on HBO. Featuring the great charmless Aaron Rodgers doing his best to charm all of us despite being charmless.
I think on the second episode, there's a thing where my boy Liev Schreiber.
We saw that.
Oh, that was the one
that was the first episode.
No,
yeah.
Okay. I've only seen
good.
one episode. It's just very weird having the guy be like, I don't know who thought that. Let's just have the guy doing the narration in the show.
Yeah, we'll keep watching that though. I say he's charmless, but it is enjoyable to watch the circus
It's
around.
always good to watch
Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, and it's like I have so much preemptive Schadenfreude because of my full confidence that this team is going to lose 10 or 11 games this year. Like, and like I know they're a good team and they're probably improved, but like I'm just so absolutely positive that they're going to lose 10 or 11 games, and it's going to be so much fun to watch it happen.
It's either going to be like a disaster like that, or they're going to have hopes dashed. Like they're going to lose in spectacular Jets fashion at some point where it's important.
Right.
the coach opens the show with the meeting talking about what eagles do and how they avoid crows or something.
Right.
They
suffocate
about-
them. They go so far.
Right.
The problem is that there is already a football team called the Eagles.
Who
And
won
it's
the
not-
fucking Super Bowl
They
last
just won
year?
the Super Bowl.
Right.
And that that's not the team he's coaching.
It's very second team in New York. It's very like second tier football team, New York Jets style football, to have your coach get up in the front of the room at the start of the year and be like, "Hey, Jets, why don't you behave like this other team's mascot and be more like this other team that won the Super Bowl last year? And that's how we're going to be good." It's like, oh, man, you really don't get it, do you?
I wonder if it came through the Eagles football team and it was used in that context and it was too lazy to update it to
I don't
Jets
know.
or something.
That's
Real
right.
dumb.
You know how Jets deal with the crows, right? They can't, because a jet doesn't have any talons.
When you're
or
a jet,
beak.
you're the jet all the way from the first cigarette to your last dying day. That's how you start a football meeting.
So the jet, when the crow lands on the jet, he has to climb up to 30, 40,000 feet to suffocate the crow. Just like the Eagles. Oh, not the Eagles, because the Jets.
Although, what is the story there? Like, you're not even like taking the competition head on. You're like using some other way to like win. Like, just go up there until it dies of other causes. Like, you should be a little more formidable than that.
We are also watching a very important show on Max.
Yeah. So there's a show filmed in your neck of the woods.
Oh.
Called Lil Jon Wants to Do What is the name of this home improvement show. And I'll
You know exactly what it's about.
it's about that. It's about Lil Jon, the great rapper and producer of much mid 2000s
The only
hip hop.
tolerable bar songs, honestly.
Friend and frequent collaborator of Ludacris, among other Atlanta hip-hop luminaries. Lil Jon also has a passion for home renovation.
Interior design.
Exterior
design.
And is working with some annoying lady who
She's fine.
also does this sort of work. And they go into rich white people, well, not just white people, but
far.
they seem to go into
People who can afford to redo their houses.
who can afford to throw $150,000 at a problem and say, look, our basement kind
Lil
of
Jon
sucks.
needs to solve it.
Let's have Lil Jon reimagine reimagine our space, and then just sort of cut him loose and let him do what he wants to do there. And that's a whole show. They
great.
do a whole show where Lil Jon goes around suburban Atlanta and finds rich white people who will let him redo their space.
And he's always wearing T-shirts that say things like "Yeah."
His
great.
T-shirt often says "What?"
I guess he needs that for people to know.
Importantly, and this is a great bit.
It's for him.
This is not meant to be criticism in any way. I fully endorse this bit that this show does. Lil Jon shows up once he's surveyed the place, and then they go back to the design workshop, and then they come back a couple weeks later, and he starts off the conversation by pouring everyone a shot of tequila.
He whips it out of nowhere.
Like he has it in a large pocket or behind his back, and there are 4 shot glasses and a bottle of fancy tequila.
And you can tell that this is the only part that the white people aren't in on.
Okay.
Like they're genuinely surprised that he wants us to do it's 11 in the morning. I guess okay. And then at least with the first and second episodes, it seems like they have more than one because it's edited.
Yeah.
So it's like shots of tequila, cheers. And then they're like, yeah, everything you're saying sounds great.
Right.
I trust you so much. Let's take naps.
Yeah, let's put a stage with concert lighting in our basement, Lil Jon. That sounds like a great idea. With silver-plated ceiling drop tiles, too. Yeah, great idea. Thanks.
That is a interesting strategy. Like, get them plastered so they're like in a diminished capacity so that any dumb idea that I come up with will sound like a good one.
Yeah.
No, he has great ideas. This is not...
I mean...
He's not fucking up their houses. He's doing...
I'll watch it. I guess the show escaped me, but I'll give it a watch. That sounds interesting.
It's called Lil Jon Wants to Do What?
Does he take some feedback? Like, we're looking for this type of look, and then he'll take Okay.
Yeah, he's trying to
He's doing interior design.
Going to surprise
his big ideas to their specific needs.
Okay.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, it's good. I want him to do our basement.
I can't imagine watching it on regular television because of commercials and stuff. But in these 42-minute chunks, it is to me, it's barely tolerable. Yes, okay, I can do this while dicking around on my phone or whatever else is going on.
You can't. You have to watch. It's a very visual show.
So this is one of those shows that's actually on television on some.
No, it's on
cable
Max.
channel?
No, I think it was on TLC or something.
Oh,
or
yeah,
HGTV.
no, it's definitely HGTV.
Right? Yeah.
No, it's for sure HGTV.
There are breaks factored in.
Yes.
You just don't have to watch them if you're on the streaming.
Yeah, we're
service.
watching it on Max.
We also saw, and I mentioned the commercials for this reason because I saw they have House Hunters collections on Max now. So they have 180 fucking episodes of House Hunters. It's
many.
Here's collection 70 of House Hunters, and there's 180 episodes. It's holy shit, how many of these goddamn things have they made? But I also I cannot fathom being in a place in my life where I go to the Max app and I'm thumbing through and I'm like, you know what I'm going to put on is commercial-free House Hunters.
Oh, yes.
So that I can bang out these episodes in 18 and a half minutes and then be on to the next one. House Hunters to me is sort of the ultimate, there is literally nothing else on.
Right.
And I'm not watching it.
And what I really want to watch is commercials.
And I'm not watching it anyway, but that's what I'm going to put on. And then occasionally I'll glance up and I'll say something antisocial about the assholes who are on the television and being particular in ways that I find obnoxious. But the idea of going and seeking that out on the app where there won't be commercials, there's something about the rhythm of that show that demands the commercial break. And I refuse to find out what it's like to indulge in that sort of thing without those commercial breaks involved.
I wonder who fits in that demographic where they like terrible shows, but the only thing worse than a terrible show is watching it with interruption. So it's I want this shit.
No, because that's when you get up and do something.
Yeah. But it's but I think these kind of shows lend themselves to you can be doing that something. You're not missing much.
You're doing something else.
Yeah, you're doing laundry.
Not the Lil Jon one. You have to focus on that.
Yes, that's appointment television. I'll give that a
This
watch.
This is what they want. They're 15, and then they're 18, and then they're 21, and eventually they're 30, and then eventually they're $60 a month. This is why so that they can deliver you some of their Alexandria-sized library of House Hunters International from now until the time you draw your final breath. And then they'll continue charging your debit card long after you're dead, as long as there's still money in the account. Abe, have you got anything else for us tonight?
Nope.
I guess that's all we've got for tonight then, and we will talk to you next time.
Later.
Back when they made comedy, back when everyone wasn't so scared. You could say vagina in a R-rated movie.
You know what's weird with that argument is that maybe not on theatrical releases, but like streaming services, they still have a lot of just that. I mean,
yeah, they're racy.
Yeah, they're not pulling any punches there. Maybe with like.
Are any of them any good though?
Well, if you want to talk about what I've been watching, then sure.
No. I walked by Lori on her treadmill, and there's some pretty racy shit going on the.
I was watching Insecure from HBO.
There was fucking
but
happening.
it was on Netflix.
Yeah, what's that about? Just to get more
I don't know.
eyeballs?
What's dumb is
Let's subscribe
I didn't
to both,
watch
though,
it the
forever.
whole time
We
it
should
was on
subscribe
HBO.
to both forever.
Shut the fuck up. I was in a shitty mood all day because of a talk I had with my husband this morning.
Oh.
I'm choking because it was a talk. The talk was me saying, boy, Disney
I didn't
Plus
want to talk about it.
is raising prices by $3. Maybe we should consider juggling one or two of these that we subscribe to.
How about we juggle the MLB
And Lori looks
app?
at me with a face of death and says, how about not? And I'd say, all right, I'll go sit in the other room. And that was the talk, apparently. We do juggle the MLB app. I don't fucking pay for it.
How much does it cost a year?
At all from September through April of next year. I sort of understand, like, Hitler had a specific idea in mind, which is that the Jews and the blacks and the gypsies are bad and they're polluting German blood and we need to get rid of them. Whereas Lenin is more like, look, I've got a political program here and I don't give a fuck. So we're going to kill 50 million people and it's going to be just fine because you won't get in line. So I sort of understand, like you can imagine,
there is no better. It's such an absurd
maybe
thing.
if you present it as Hitler was a deranged psycho who had a sickness to him, whereas Lenin was a clear-headed ideologue who had no problem doing genocide despite not being a deranged psycho who had a sickness about him, right? Like somehow there's a rationality to Lenin that makes him more despisable than the Hitler monster who is just, there's something wrong with him.
Right, but
Why are you talking about this?
The proceeding was created with 100% human content.